So, Carolyn, we had a chat last time about, in general, the transition, that the cycles that we're going through socially, culturally, individually, collectively, and the earth cycles and larger cycles and cosmic cycles. Everything is basically going around in cycles because I don't feel that nature, reality, or the cosmos does straight lines. Um, But in those cycles, when we get to a kind of closing of a cycle, there's usually, as you mentioned, these disruptions, and you've just mentioned about potential huge mega volcanic eruption in your neck of the woods. And you said that this is potentially bringing up or dredging up a lot of the fear. Um, and you said that can bring out the nastiness in people. So what do you mean by that? And why do you think it is bringing up the fear? Is it something about these times or these transitional or closing cycles that naturally has a kind of primeval fear that comes up, or do you think a lot of it's being artificially manipulated?
Oh, interesting question. I don't know that it has to be artificially manipulated. I think it's just plain scary. And what it indicates, or what it potentially indicates, is the ending of things. And, just looking at the way as cultures we think about death and dying on the individual scale, which is to be in denial of it pretty much completely, then I'm not surprised that collectively we are terrified of being wiped out suddenly. The ground rumbles, fire shoots up into the sky. I mean, it's terrifying. I mean, I think reasonably terrifying. So, of course, we're scared. And if we look at, well, certainly my culture, but your culture too, the basic denial of death and dying. And you might recall that Terry Pratchett, the author,
Yeah.
was diagnosed with something that was going to take him out. I don't remember exactly what it was. And he decided to go out deliberately and use that as an opportunity to speak, to, while he still could do it, to tell people, here is why I'm doing what I'm doing. Here is why I am not afraid, because it's the ending of one chapter, but not the ending of everything. And here is the way I choose to do it with my beloved family and friends, etc. And he did that until very close to his actual death. And he did it for, I mean, he has a name and has a following, so he could be heard speaking of that. You don't have to be afraid of death. So it's a subject that I think is up in the world, and I think it's a necessary subject because, well, just because it's real and you have to face what's real, but also it's universal. There's nobody who is not going to die, even though in our primes we tend to think we may be the exception. However, we're not. And sooner or later we do take off. And, if you can accept the reality of an ending to this cycle of your existence, then you can accept cycles. And I think, and it gives you another perspective on the nature of the universe, how it all works, what our lives are about, how they fit into a larger cycle and a larger picture. And therefore, if you are redefining the universe from the way it has been defined by the churches, and historically for what, at least 2,500 years, if not more, then you are giving the whole society an opportunity to shift its pattern, shift its basic understanding of who we are, where we are, and what we're doing here. So I look at it in terms of the whole money issue. What is our economy based on? Well, it's based on the thought that we can own a piece of the earth. but that's ridiculous. We
Mm.
can't. However, we pretend that we can, and we have this whole inheritance thing, and it's only the boys who can inherit, and yeah, and we can do anything we want with the land that we own, and so we can destroy it, and then we can make money on it, and all those things that are basic to the society that we live in, which are crazy. I mean, they're just wrong.
Mhm.
And we take it as gospel truth that that's the way, our economic systems are the way it's supposed to go. And then half of us, or more than half of us, are too poor to bring up our children and feed them. And then a whole other segment of us has way, way too much more than they need. And so we're completely out of balance, which means that we are not mirroring the universe, which is, I mean, from my understanding and from most religious understanding, it's my mind just kind of slipped away from it. But everything has to move together, and it has to be in balance. And a healthy system is a system in balance, whether it's a social system or an individual body
Mhm.
or the natural world, which is a compilation of life forms of many different sizes and periods of being here on the earth. So, we have basically created a whole society for a long time based on incorrect information. So this is an opportunity. I would like to think that this is an opportunity to correct that. And nothing is going to push us to do it unless we're scared out of our minds.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, you mentioned there the current system, especially the capitalist or the greed or the accumulation system. It ties
Mhm.
into that, the old joke by saying that, there's only two things which are certain in life, and that's death and taxes. Um, and of course, you mentioned you have an inheritance tax, you have death tax. So the whole idea really is, as you said, it's like there's been a kind of replacement system. You know, I think our ancestors used to live more in a natural, in sync system with the environment. They understood death because they were closer to observing the natural cycles, and they knew that things decayed and died and then grew again in the next season. And that seemed to be what you're referring to as this natural, in sync, organic system. And then humanity has replaced on top of it this kind of straitjacket, it seems like, this artificial system, whereby you can reap certain material benefits from it. You can control it in certain ways, but in order to maintain it, you have to inject a certain belief systems, thinking patterns, worldviews, perspectives, reality sets. And one of those is the material paradigm. And the material paradigm is like, once it's gone, it's gone, which is why we have to accumulate it. And
Right.
death is part of that. Once it's gone, it's gone. And so this unnatural understanding, it seems, has been a kind of replacement understanding of death, and that everyone fears it. But yeah, I think you're right. It ties in very well with this capitalist system, not only because of the taxes, but now this, let's say, capitalist system is going more technological. It plays very well into this transhumanist agenda future, whereby if death's the end, why don't you pay more to try to keep your immortality? You know, um, in the 70s, I think there was, or 80s, there was this, cryogenics movement trying to freeze your organs, your body. Now it's this upload your consciousness, but immortality, trying to escape the inevitable, then I think takes you out of a conscious understanding of the process. So therefore, we're not conscious. We can't, it's very hard to die consciously because you fear it, you're running away from it, you're trying to deny it, you're trying to, those with money are trying to, augment their body as much as possible to run away from it. And it's an artificial construct.
Right. And it's based on, as I see it, it's based on fear.
Mhm.
And it's based on fear of not being. And I, when I sort of trace it down the rabbit hole, what I come to is the, it's just escaped this aging brain. Let me get back to it. But we're terrified of what we don't understand or what we understand incorrectly. And I fault many of our systems, including the churches, for enforcing that kind of incorrect understanding of the nature of the reality that they're supposed to represent. So we are, I mean, I see mistakes at so many levels. And one of those levels is the nature of spirituality and the nature of the universe itself, which we see only as a three-dimensional phenomenon, which is simply, just scientifically, it's incorrect. And so that point of view is so ingrained that it even affects the scientists who are really working under a three-dimensional model. And then plucking whatever it is that they're studying or looking at out of the context in which it exists in the world itself, and then studying all the little bits of it without seeing how it connects. And I mean, I have two children who are scientists, and my husband was a scientist, and I can't get through to any of them. God bless them, and they're brilliant. But one interesting little personal story here is that my husband, who was a professor of chemistry for, I don't know, over 50 years, on his deathbed, began to get what I'd been talking about all those years. And his eyes went luminous. And he said, excuse me, we have garbage trucks and barking dogs. Okay, I hope it's not drowning me out. But
No, no.
he said, I see it. He said, it's worlds and worlds and worlds and worlds. And I'm shaking my head. That's it. And he said, but it's so profound. It's so beautiful. And then he died. So I mean, my God, but he got it moments before his death. So it's a very poignant thing. And I was actually quite angry with him. You can't die now because we have to talk about this.
Yeah.
But I will hold on to that as very, very precious. And so as a whole structure, as a whole society, as a whole culture, we don't know that yet. Where I get a lot of my own hope from is the young people, those who, God bless them, are not trying to take themselves out, which unfortunately that's how terrified they are. They're afraid to stay. But they are questioning, what are they teaching us? It's wrong. And then they're told that, no, it's not wrong. So we are at that crux, and I'm watching the young ones with great excitement, enthusiasm, and holding my breath. Come on, guys, you can do this. So what it's going to take, and how many generations have to get born who are strong enough in that recognition of how the world goes, not to take this nonsense that they've been given by the society.
Well, I mean, if as a human race, if we don't come to a grander awareness of the transitional cycles in birth and death, then we are not going to develop the way we need to do as a society, because any material development has its limitations. If you just go material, then that doesn't have a long-term evolutionary potential, in my understanding. So we have to kind of get back on track. And as you're right, I mean, if I can put it this way, one of the advantages of death is that everyone gets to an understanding eventually. because even if you don't understand it in this incarnation, when you pass over, you have to come to an understanding because you're there. So it's just, unfortunately, we need to have the understanding in life, because then it changes everything. If we see life as the incarnations of a much grander spirit or consciousness or soul, however you want to put it, then you see that there's a great, much grander meaning and purpose in the whole of the incarnation. It's not just an anomaly whereby life is an accident on a dead rock. So we see the cosmos and everything in a completely different way. And I think, and then that will help to take out the fear. But I like the comment you made about even on a spiritual level, we're getting it wrong. Because if we go back in history where, ancestors were much closer to nature and the living spirits and animism, they didn't need these spiritual theories. They didn't need spiritual textbooks. And in fact, only I think in the middle of the 19th century that the idea of the afterlife came into our mindset with spiritualism and seances, and like the spiritualism of Allan Kardec in Europe. Before that, people thought there is no life after death. So, it gradually crept in, but in a very strange way, through certain belief systems like theosophy and seances and spiritualism. And even now, there are people arguing and debating about the afterlife, what happens. So it's become even theorized rather than something naturalized.
Right. And that will take, I think part of what that will take is some kind of acknowledgement of indigenous ways of thinking. And that may be helped by the whole psychedelic movement, because more and more people are actually they're seeing it. They're opening to it. And where do I take my hope from? Well, the young people, of course. And I'm looking also, in terms of what you were talking about, at colonialism and how Europeans came into indigenous places, where the people had their own belief systems, and basically called them savages, and tried to educate them in what was correct, but was actually not correct, and then took over their worlds for their own economic benefit. And that's evil, I think. And I watch with great horror, actually, what's happening with the British monarchy. I think we talked about that a little bit last time. There's still, it ties some people together, and it leaves everybody else out. And that's not going to be okay for much longer, I think. Too much discrepancy between what some people have and other people do not have.
Yeah, interesting that you tie it back to colonialism, because you're right, it's partly responsible for destroying the knowledge that was indigenous or natural knowledge and replaced it with this starved knowledge, starved information, let's say, with no nutrients. It's like someone came in, took away all the great food and replaced it with fast food, and we've been starving ever since. There was a North American Indian scholar and activist, Jack Forbes, who actually wrote a book, something Cannibals and Something. He said this colonial mindset came in and took away our knowledge and gave us a mind virus. He called it Wetiko. So he says that it's this, this kind of colonial mindset, which has been part of our, especially in the Western world, this kind of developmental impulse, these progress and that. He refers to it as a mind virus. And that's why we've basically been living from a wrong thinking. Just like you put a virus into a computer, the computer's never going to operate correctly or coherently until you get rid of that virus. And humanity is still operating from this almost mind virus, and part of that is this fear of death and materiality and accumulation and this uptightness.
Exactly. So, given that that's the reality, the young people are for the most part not accepting that, and they're getting into trouble as a result of not accepting that, by the powers that still be. I mean, I'm fascinated by the British monarchy, and I'm watching what's happening to poor Harry. He has this horror story, and he's gotten out of it, which took a lot of courage on his part. And that he's hated in the press. Why? What are they scared of? Anyhow, we're in the maelstrom right now, and I don't know how long we have to do this before we actually pull out.
Mm-hmm. I mean, looking at the younger generation, I mean, obviously they're not homogenous. On one side, you see so many still caught up in the materialistic paradigm, and they're just glued to their devices, and they're so hooked onto entertainment and the latest Beyonce concert or the latest Instagram influencer, the lowest common denominator. And then you get others who kind of get it instinctively. They don't need to read books. In fact, reading from younger generations has vastly decreased. They're more interested in visuals and videos. So they're getting their information from a different place, maybe more instinctively. But there's still this quite sharp divide between those who are caught up in all the fanfare and distractions of this material life, and others who seem to get it very quickly, very naturally, very instinctively. I mean, do you see these discrepancies?
Oh, absolutely. And the way I interpret it in my own mind and experience is that some of us, you and I, probably good examples, were born with some level of soul knowledge, whatever I mean by that. But the way I am and the way I think and sort of who I am in the world, I have been since I was very small. So I figure it was born in. Certainly wasn't where my family was. I certainly didn't get good marks for it. I almost flunked out of elementary school, mostly because of the multiple choice questions. You take these tests, and you had to choose one to describe whatever it was, and I would look at them, and they were all partly right, and I didn't know how to choose one, so I was a flunk out. I was just no good. But somehow, at some level, I hung on because I knew it was clear enough that way of thinking, that small way of thinking that is our kind of cultural norm, was not okay, and that it was not correct. And I'm glad that I've lived long enough to be able to talk about it in a public forum like this. This is sort of amazing. I've written all these books, and most people have had no idea what to do with my books, but they're all an attempt to put this way of thinking into story. So I think you asked me last time, was there a lag time between my own coming up with something and then seeing it happen in the society? And I said at least 20 years. You remember that?
Yeah, I remember. Yeah. So that was in your experience. So probably you've seen that lag time decreased in each generation slightly, yeah?
I have, yes, except, I don't, I'm not sure what I'm answering here, but I I think that for me, the lag time is still 20 to 25 years, say,
Mhm.
between my, for example, being wanting to handle in public view the whole issue of death by by using my own death as an example, my own choice of means of dying, to use it as a teaching. And that, I mean, that doesn't carry a lot of weight in the society. And I have to fight for it because medicine and the law actually, oh my goodness, I actually got arrested after my husband died because he was ready to die in the hospital, and they were enforcing more life-saving methods that were essentially torturing him. And he knew that he was dying, and he wanted to go home to die. And I wasn't allowed to. So I said, well, I'm going to take his gurney in the elevator, and I'm going to walk the gurney home if you don't let me do this in a proper way. Anyhow, they finally kind of reneged, and I got him home, but it was against medical advice. And he was with us for another 4 or 5 days. We were able to, well, we were able to be together at home and open a window and get real air. I'll never forget his first breath of that real air, because he'd been in the hospital for about 2 weeks. And what happened to me afterwards was that I got picked up by the police because I had assisted a suicide.
Crazy. So because you took him home to die in natural environment, which I'm sure made the world of difference to both of you, they actually saw that as assisting his suicide because you took him away from medical care.
Exactly.
Mm.
It's crazy.
That's
And everybody
antiquated.
is afraid of legalities and being sued. So it comes back to the laws which support all of this unnatural way of living life in the world. So it's a whole interlaced, knotted up system based on basic mistakes. So what I'm hoping for and working towards, and have been trying to do most of my adult life, is to change the basic meaning, to point at indigenous ways of knowledge, but not even in indigenous language, but in my own language. Don't have to get very esoteric. You just have to look at the world that you see outside your window.
So Carolyn, the way you're speaking about trying to bring forth an education about the transitional process or the physical passing over, how would you frame that? Are you trying to kind of demonstrate there's a way to consciously approach the transition? And how will you go about it?
How will I go about it? Well, I will be doing it rather than talking about it, I guess. I don't know. I'm still trying to put together a team to do this with. And, everybody said, oh, you're not dying, for goodness sakes. So I have to deal with that. And I'm not dying yet. I mean, to my shock, I'm still going strong, although I'm not sure why, but here I am. And maybe it's in order to do this. I don't know. So I have found a nurse, very progressive nurse here in Vermont, who will act as a kind of death doula for me. And finding a doctor here has proved to be very, very difficult. However, with her help, I have found one man who's kind of interested in what I'm doing. I haven't met him yet. And, I don't know, I'm kind of shooting in the dark. And who knows, but I may, drown in the river accidentally before I have a chance to do all my big fancy thing here.
As they say, if you want to make God laugh, tell him your plans.
That's right. Or the one I've heard is tell her your plans.
Yeah, exactly. So obviously you're saying is that you want to, it's important to have a context where you want to be at home or in a home environment. You don't want to be part of the so-called industry of the healthcare. You want,
Absolutely.
no. And if possible, you'd like to kind of document, maybe through talking or videos, or just sharing it with those around you, documenting how you're going through it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To
I've
take away
also
other people's fear of the same process.
That's the hope, that it will actually ring bells with others. And many years ago, I wrote a novel called The Experience of a Lifetime about conscious dying. And it it came out way, way, way before anybody was willing to address the subject in the 80s, I think, which was too soon.
Mm-hmm.
But now the subject is up, and I have all my remaindered books. So
Mm-hmm.
so I've been trying to to do this in the world in using the forms that I have to use. But I was younger then, so I wasn't dying. Now I'm older, and
Mm-hmm.
I will be one of these days. And again, it's now much more commonly up in our society. And so I'd like to take advantage of the timing. I don't think there's an accident that
Mm-hmm.
I am reaching the age I'm reaching at the time when the whole world is going through major transitions. And that's what death is. It's a transition
Yeah.
in lives, or what we call life and what we call death.
Mm-hmm.
And
It's funny how I think one of the problematics of death is that it's because it's put as a polarity end game. You know, life begins here, life is a linear journey, and death goes here. So the closer we are to this side of the polarity, the more fear we have because we have less time. But I mean, in fact, life and death is an amalgam. We're living and dying all the time. You know, our cells are dying every 24 hours, and everything in the world is dying because everything is being reborn and coming into emergence again. So I think if we can kind of get beyond this polarity of life is here and death is there, then it's more kind of integrated. It's more whole, and perhaps that will help to kind of get away from this time's running out panic. Because you mentioned at the beginning of our chat today that this fear of potential end of this cycle is bringing a lot of nastiness out in people. Because as you say, if people think, things are collapsing and things are finishing, and they're in this mentality that that's the end of the linear line, then they're going to get panicky, they're going to get irritable, they're going to get anxious, and they can be quite nasty. And perhaps we're seeing that played out a bit in the world right now, this kind of anxiety, because there's a fear that this transition is going to wipe everyone out, when in fact it can be a triggering mutational effect. But people aren't seeing that so much.
well, because we're already afraid without necessarily having a reason for it. And there's lots of right on the ground, everyday things to be scared of. And the powers that be are not helping that. They are using that against us for their own gain, whatever that means. And we're stuck in a whole history and a whole movement that is not in our interest, and that's not true. But we are stuck in it. So I figure that people like you, people like me, and lots of others are in a position to to put a stop to that in our own particular ways with our own small communities or audiences, and to say the opposite. And I feel very strongly about it that I'm one of those people. And so I will do it in all the ways I know how to. And oh my poor mother-in-law, when I was I was working on the first book, I would sometimes not be available for my children, who were teenagers at the time, because I was busy and I was with a dying friend, because I did it through real experience with people I was very close to who were dying. And she said, "That's morbid. You're crazy to do that. You know, life comes first, etc., etc., etc." And it's not that that was wrong,
Mhm.
but she was terrified of her own death. And I think that's true for everybody in the world of scholarship who objects to talking about the nature of the cycle and the nature of the ending of a life. They're just terrified.
Mhm.
So I get it. You know, you can't talk sense or reason to somebody who's just afraid.
Mhm. I mean, as the saying goes, fear is the greatest killer. It doesn't actually kill you, but it stops you from living.
It stops you from living. Exactly.
Mm.
Yeah.
So, I mean, on individual, there's only so much you can do on an individual level. But again, if it try to get back to renormalize the transitioning process by having people around you when you're going through it, rather than being isolated in some medical establishment.
Mm.
Because I mean,
Boy,
that is isolating. I mean, people know that once you go into like a hospital, you have less chance of coming out of it alive because it's a death culture.
it's a fear culture.
Yeah.
And you know, it was very poignant when it was my own husband, because he was a scientist and he believed in the science of medicine, until he didn't. And I could not, you know, it was not for me to make his decisions for him. I would have had him, well, I would have done it very differently. And it wasn't until he recognized the fact, he said, "They're torturing me." I said, "Yes, they're torturing me." He said, "Get me out of here right away." I said, "By tonight you will be out."
Mhm.
And then I got arrested for doing that. So, you know, we're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place. And it's a transition.
Mhm.
And if you've been living one particular life script all your life, and that's the history that you've learned in your education, then you have to be kind of brave or crazy to challenge that.
Mhm.
And, you know, and then you have to challenge it on every level. You know, if you're a churchgoer, you have to challenge it on the level of, of your religious community and the whole belief system. And if you're you know, if you're a professor, as Herb was, you have to challenge it on the, I mean, my marriage was a very interesting one, and we were married for a long time, but we had this conversation every day, pretty much, because he's a scientist, and a very well-known one and a very successful one in a big institution. And he would say, he'd say, at school, I'm the, he's referring to himself, I am the radical, and I come home and I'm the conservative.
Mhm. It's
And it was
levels
just
within levels, you know.
levels and levels,
Yeah.
right?
So, what I mean, we've always kind of talked about bringing the personal individual into the bigger, grander picture. Um, you know, we talked last time about all these grander kind of social and geological cycles creating a lot of fear. And there are people, a lot of talk, a lot of chatter online about this could be, you know, the end, the Armageddon point. But you see, I mean, Armageddon is one way to look at the end time. The other way is apocalypse. And I've mentioned this before because apocalypse from the Greek means revelation, whereas
Mm.
Armageddon means the war at the end of time, you know, or the end of the cycle. So one is the kind of materialistic, fearful, warmongering way of looking at it, Armageddon, whereas apocalypse can be seen as a revelation and a revealing. And when you get a revealing, you can see like a new start. So perhaps if we're going through this cycle now, if we can try to shift the patterning over from Armageddon mode to apocalypse mode, and if people do feel themselves moving through this, not as dying, but as a kind of revelation, then that will help to shift the personal feelings of their own death.
And I'm reminded, I mean, many people are just scared. And so making that apocalyptic shift is not simple, because the new way of thinking and the new way of behaving is unknown. Mm-hmm. And I don't know what to do about it, except this one thing that I can do in the privacy of my own home, mm-hmm. which is to die consciously and not be afraid. Let's see if I can do it. You know, I may be scared stiff at the end, but I don't think so.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, understandably, there's going to be some apprehension about, I mean, nobody wants to die or die before they're ready or their time, because, you know, of course, of what you leave behind. So there's bound to be some apprehension. You know, so yeah, I mean, if I say to people, I don't want to die, I think I'm more worried about pain than actual dying. Yeah. So yeah, but I mean, you're right. I think there's this notion that we're being suppressed, and also in this suppression, they've suppressed the human sovereignty. So you can't even walk out of a hospital. You can't even, let's say, die in dignity. You can't do the things which embrace your sovereignty because you're being suppressed as a citizen rather than a sovereign being. So I think this is part of the change as well, is that we have to get out of the fear mentality of, can I really do things which are inherent and noble as a sovereign being without trespassing on the rights and sovereignty of another person?
That's right, getting other people in trouble, mm-hmm. which is more of a danger if you put yourself into the hands of that system. And so to stay out of the system, I mean, it's going to take something in my family, if nowhere else, that I say, no, I am not going to treat this da-da-da. I'm ready to go. And I will probably get objection. But, I mean, it could hardly be otherwise, really. Because from the point of view of anybody else, I'm no longer around. And if they enjoy having me around, they would rather keep having me around. But who knows? Who knows? Who knows?
I think we are seeing some indications of this more in the public domain, because there have been people, hear stories of people who have contracted a fatal disease, whether it's cancer or something, and they have documented their process to leave behind a testimony or to bring awareness to certain charities or awareness to certain diseases. And because of the nature of the communications, and they can record this and distribute it and disseminate it. So before, you see, death, I think, was very kind of a private affair, where if you talked about it outside of your home, it was taboo. It was, shoved away. So I think gradually it is coming out, and people are documenting it or some ways, or talking about it a bit more. But I mean, it's going to take time to chip away at this whole kind of artificial collective mindset that we've been programmed with. But I do see that there is a change in that direction.
Well, I think what you and I are trying to do in the world with the work that we do is to chip away and change that mindset, to the extent that that mindset is only partial. We're not seeing whole pictures of anything, that it's not very courageous. We're trying to push through that fear barrier. And we are also, I mean, what you and I believe, are both trying to do in the world is to open up the mindset and see the universe as a whole, interconnected, always interchanging, always in motion, beyond time and space, etc., etc., etc. This marvelous wonder that we are lucky enough to be part of, and we only understand in a very partial way. So, I mean, that's the way I would describe my own work and my own purpose. And I believe that's true for you too, or am I?
Understand for myself and to share that life is incredible. It's so vast. It's beyond these narrow, myopic perspectives that we've been basically conditioned with. And to see life as this monumental and beautiful adventure in all its guises, in its creative ways, and that we can participate in that, and we can, in each realm where we pass through in the life experience, we can add something more to that, and that it is a journey, and at every stage of that journey we can hopefully learn more, be more, and to break away from any artificial parameters that are stifling the spirit. And the moment it's the human spirit, because we're in the human vessel, but in any medium where the spirit is, we don't want that to be contained, constrained, or suppressed, because the vitality of life is so much beyond that.
Right, and to give up. I mean, here we are alive in these amazing bodies on this amazing planet, in this amazing universe, and to make any of the, to dull down the experience of it for any reason whatsoever, even pain, I think is a tremendous waste. And it reminds me of when I was having my babies, which was, I mean, my children are probably older than you. Is that possible? Anyhow, I have very adult children. And in those days, the doctors were all male, there were no midwives in California at that time. And they were accustomed to putting the mother out so that she wouldn't feel pain, and therefore also wouldn't push, which is, of course, that's how you get the baby out, and that's the first experience that a living child has, is that struggle, very important part of it. And in order to do it differently, my goodness, I had to almost become a bad guy. We had, our doctor was a friend, and fortunately the first baby was born in the middle of the night. And so there was very little staff around and we could get away with it. But that was not allowed normally. I was not put out. I was there for the whole thing and worked my little tail off, literally, and got that baby born. And then why did I go into that whole thing?
Well, I mean, it's quite telling if the the narrative is trying to get the mother's unconscious when the baby's being born. I mean, that's almost an analogy of what the system wants for humans throughout their life experience, an unconscious state.
That's right. And especially women. And all the doctors at that time, obstetricians, were all male. It was before women were becoming doctors, which is kind of nuts. But so, and it was pretty much taken for granted by the society itself, except for a couple of people like me who said, no, I won't do it that way. Unfortunately, had a doctor who would work with me and my husband. And so we had our babies free.
So, I mean, it seems like the pattern what we're talking about, or what you're framing, is that at all times to be conscious of the birth process. And what we are trying to do is to show to be conscious as much as possible throughout life, and then to be conscious of the kind of transitioning period.
That's right.
At all times to be conscious.
Yes, and I think that fear of pain and that fear of lack of control, needing the control, is something that has taken a lot of work on the part of a lot of people to change. And women, the whole women's movement has happened since my time. And you know, at the time I just thought, oh my God, all these angry women, I don't want to be part of them. But in fact, at this point in my life, I'm very, very grateful for the work and the fight that so many women spent their lives doing for the freedom of all of us, men included.
I just had another thought. I mean, I don't know if you've heard about these recent new narratives about after death. They say, "Don't go towards the light," because that's the
I haven't
trap.
heard that.
No, there is some narratives online. People are talking about it, saying like the light is actually what they call a reincarnation trap, and it just brings you back into life, and you can't move on. And so they're saying, "Don't go towards the light," and this has potential to bring in another level of fear of the transition. If you know the sense of light and the idea that light is always represented this, the illuminate, the goodness, that could actually be a trap. Just adds on an extra level of fear at the end of one's life. So it's like, well, where do I go? I always say, well, don't worry so much, because when you get over there, you'll probably figure it out. You know, but it's all piling up. The pre-transition stage is getting more and more confusing and fearful, and it's like you're putting on more and more clothes, getting hotter and hotter when we should be taking them off and and getting debaggaged, but we're getting more baggaged.
Oh, I wonder if we don't, as a species, think too much. We would do much better if we spent more time feeling and loving each other and laughing a lot and not warning. Oh my goodness. We all know it's dangerous out there, but that's really part of the game. It's nobody ever said this was going to be easy, but boy, do we learn stuff, right?
No, indeed. And yeah, I think that's perhaps a good place to pause our conversation now. The fact that we should probably think less and feel more, and get with the game.
Yeah,
So